Idea's parents, Nate and Cleo, are in this chamber tonight, along with more than 24 Americans whose lives have been torn apart by gun violence. They deserve a vote. They deserve a vote.
I bet you remember vividly where you were last September 2012, when you heard a report on the newscast here in the Twin Cities that most of us think, oh, no, not here in the Twin Cities. Well, it did happen. It happened to the Rahamim family. It happened to the father, Reuven Rahim, and it ultimately happened to all of his children. Someone came into his place of business, shot and killed him, shot and killed others in his place of business. It was stunning to all of us, but I can't imagine being a family member as Sami Rahamim, who had to live through it, and now Sami is doing something that is so honoring to your father and most of us would consider absolutely impossible. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Nancy.
You've just come back from Washington, D.C., spending some time with Keith Ellison, one of our representatives. What is it you've been working on with him?
Actually, just this last time I was in D.C., I was there with AIPAC, which is the America-Israel Public Affairs Committee. They work to strengthen the U.S.-Israel relationship. This is something that my dad had gotten me involved in, from a young age. It was a way for him to kind of bridge the connection from his homeland to the land that he called home.
Your father came from Israel at the age of 22, married an American woman, raised his 3 children here, and built an enormously successful business, only to be shot down and taken as he was. You have decided to be very public about what happened to your father and the other people in your father's business that day because you would like to see to it that other families don't suffer in the same way.
Yeah, my congressman, Representative Keith Ellison of Minneapolis, invited me to be his guest at the State of the Union. I had the opportunity actually to meet with President Obama last Monday in Minneapolis when he came to discuss gun violence and gun violence prevention, and he was absolutely right when he said that we all deserve a vote.
Gun violence in this country is an absolute epidemic. It's a plague, and there's so much we can do to prevent it from happening to other people. I can tell you firsthand, Nancy, the absolute horror, terror, and trauma that comes with a shooting like this.
How did you learn what happened?
I was on a bus traveling from here to Wisconsin-Madison, and I saw an early report on my phone about a mass shooting. It was huge news in the Bryn Mawr neighborhood of Minneapolis. I knew that that's where my dad had built his business, and so I sent him a message saying, hey, be careful. They don't know what the status is, whatever. Of course, I would never get an answer to this message because just shortly before he had been shot and killed at his company along with 5 other men. It's a day that I'll, wake up knowing every morning and go to sleep knowing every night, the horror that was brought upon my family and our community and the accent signage community.
What is it specifically that you are out there doing? You're talking, you're meeting. Embellish a little bit for us.
I've been working very hard at the legislature, both at the state and national level. Right now at the state level, we're getting up to the breaking point here.
It's terribly disappointing. I am so saddened and angered at the same time as to what I think has happened in the Minnesota legislature. We started with we're going to ban assault weapons and we're going to limit the number of bullets in a magazine and we're going to have universal background checks and we're going to close the loopholes at gun shows. And as we're recording this, I don't know what's going to happen in the hearings, but we are now down to no universal background checks and maybe some discussion about mental patients or people with mental issues and some other issues.
Yeah.
I shouldn't be as disappointed as I am?
I don't think so.
Okay, thank you. Talk me off the ledge,
I'm going to give you some hope, Nancy.
Okay.
Okay. we still have our bill to pass.
As we record this, it's still in play. We don't know what's going to happen to it. It's not looking good, is it? What do you think?
You know, Representative Paymar, who's authoring the universal background check bill, has been a great leader on this.
Yes, he has.
It's come a little bit late, but we're finally starting to hear DFL leadership take a real stand on universal background checks. The Speaker of the House, Paul Thiessen, and Governor Dayton, too. Throughout the hearings, many times people had thrown at us, you know, this is just a feel-good bill, you know, it doesn't actually achieve anything.
When somebody says, I'm sorry, Sammy, when somebody says to you, this is just a feel-good bill, you hear that phrase, a man whose father was killed by gun violence. How on earth do you respond to that kind of lack of awareness?
Well, there's just so many, you know, problems with a statement like that. One is that I don't feel good about being here. You know, I do not feel good about having to sit in this hearing room, you know, as someone who has been so personally touched by gun violence. But at the same time, you know, even if I did feel good about being there, this isn't a feel-good bill. This is something that will save lives, tangible lives. There's a lot we can do about this, and that starts with universal background checks. And you know, constituents believe that. We've seen a poll come out in the Star Tribune that prompted Governor Dayton to be so outspoken now about this, that over 70% of Minnesotans agree that there should be universal background checks.
Including gun owners.
Including gun owners. So
including Republicans.
A majority of gun owners, you know, the top rankings of law enforcement, the Minnesota Police and Peace Officers Association, you know, all kinds of religious backgrounds. A good friend of mine, Mary Johnson, the founder of From Death to Life, says, we're sick and tired of being sick and tired. And you know, that's the crux of it. We can't allow our kids to just simply be killed anymore. That we need universal background checks so that someone can't just go online and buy an Uzi or a Glock.
If things go the way that some of us fear and we don't make nearly enough progress this time around, can you find the strength to stay in the fight for the long haul and make the change?
You know, with such an overwhelming support, 92% of Americans want universal background checks, and the legislature still refuses to give it to us. Ron Latz came out and said, you know, our Senate isn't run by the NRA. That we're not.
But apparently it is, and apparently our national government is as well, because the very people who are representing us, who should be listening to what we're saying at 70, 80, 90%, are listening to the NRA, who's writing checks for their campaigns instead.
Yeah, I'd really like to prove you wrong.
Good, do it.
You know, that's the goal here, is to show that we really do have some bold characters in Washington and in St. Paul. People like Representative Rick Nolan, you know, the U.S. Congressman serving in his first term in over 30 years.
He's making some good noise, isn't he?
I just had the opportunity to meet with Representative Nolan in Washington, and you know, what he kept saying to me was that nobody's as surprised that I'm thrilled to be here as me. You know, he was he's got this youthful energy to you know, create some real change in Congress.
What would you like all of us to do? I'm very into call to action. You are on the front line fighting for something because your father was killed by a gun. What can we do to help you?
We think we have, we think the votes are there. We need to call Representative Hillstrom, who came out with her NRA bill. Not only does it do nothing, but it does some bad things, where it targets communities of color. You know, the type of laws that are going to be enforced are only enforced in communities of color. You know, I'm not comfortable with that. I think that, you know, when you have an opportunity to do something that's so good and so meaningful, like universal background checks.
Like saving lives.
Like saving lives.
Actually having people walk around live instead of being killed. That's as big as it gets.
92% of Americans, they support universal background checks. 92% of Americans. The NRA stance is still opposed to universal background checks. This makes communism, polygamy, and Hugo Chavez all more popular than the NRA's opinion on universal background checks.
And so they've earned it.
They've earned it. So if that's where we're at, then I'm at a real loss for words at that point.
I can't imagine anybody better to speak than someone who has suffered firsthand. I'm so glad to meet you, and your father would be so very proud of you, Sami, what you're doing to honor him. We will get on the phones. We will do what we need to do. We're in this with you together. Thank you for leading us.
Nancy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sami Rahamim, have you ever met someone so courageous?
Gabby Giffords deserves a vote. The families of Newtown deserve a vote. The families of Aurora deserve a vote. The families of Oak Creek and Tucson and Blacksburg and the countless other communities ripped open by gun violence, they deserve a simple vote. They deserve a vote.